Resiliency Within, with host Elaine Miller-Karras, is brought to you by Trauma Resource Institute, Incorporated. Visit traumaresourceinstitute.com.
Welcome to Resiliency Within, featuring your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. In unprecedented times, our beliefs and well-being are put to the test. When we take the things we've learned in life and look at challenges in a whole new way, we learn to develop resiliency, which can then be used to promote healing and personal strength. Now, here is Elaine Miller-Karras.
Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am so absolutely excited to have on the show again Jenn Turner. And we've described this show as Transcending Patriarchy, Women Reimagining Leadership and Healing. We have just recently gotten to know each other, and every time we talk, practically can't stop talking because I think we not only have similar vistas, but I think I'm learning a lot from you, Jenn. And I want to tell them who you are and do a little bit more of a description. But Jenn Turner has devoted her career to supporting survivors of trauma through really compassionate, body-centered approaches to healing. She is the executive director and co-founder of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in Massachusetts. Are you actually in Boston?
I'm outside of Boston.
Outside of Boston, and where she oversees training initiatives and advances the development of innovative body-first interventions for trauma recovery. She also is an internationally recognized trainer in trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga, leading professional trainings across the United States. She also consults with organizations. There's so many things I can say about you, but I want them to hear from you about just the richness of your thinking and just your curiosity about the world. I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate the conversations that we've had, Jenn. So we were talking about actually after the last show about just how patriarchal traditions have also influenced us. And we thought, there's something that happens with women when they come into authority positions that sometimes can be very often bringing a very different vista to organizations, also to healing trauma. And that we're not saying that that people who are of the other gender or are non-binary, also we all have a richness, all of us together, in terms of how we look at the world. But we've seen that as we work with our allies across genders, that we can create also new paradigms of leadership. And we wanted to talk about that because it also, I think, for both of us, and I often call them my covered up battle scars of dealing with patriarchal systems. I think that's what I said to you, Jenn. But I think there's ways that we can honestly, and I do believe that we both believe this, Jenn, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we really can foster healing across all communities where every voice is respected and every person has the opportunity to thrive. So with that, Jenn, what is on your mind as we're getting started today with our discussion?
Yeah, thank you. I love these conversations, and I'm so grateful to have this connection with you that continues to grow. I think I sort of came to today feeling like, one, I don't have answers. I have many, maybe I have a few thoughts, but I don't have answers, and I have curiosity and questions, and even to invite your listeners into that space as well around, this is an exploration from both of our respective lived experience and the learning and the things that we have learned and teach in the world. But I'm just really so curious to think about the ways that the patriarchal system that we've all inherited, and that includes all genders, including men, that we've all been sort of inherited and indoctrinated in, like how that shows up and how we can choose to do something different, what that could look like. And of course, you and I can only speak from our own lived experience in that way, but
Yes.
also a learned experience. One of the things I think so much about, I can ramble on here, so just
Oh,
interrupt me.
no, please continue. I don't really think it's rambling. I think it's really expressing something that's really important. So go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, when my co-founder and I, Dave Emerson, when we founded the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, so much of what we were really focused on was how do we create a non-hierarchical system at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, that we can do this work in the world that is relational, that's about power sharing. But so often we see the institutions that we're in mirroring these very things we're trying to undo with our clients. And so there's like so much code switching that happens rather than what's it like to really live into um,
Could you
like
say a little bit more? What do you mean by code switching? People may not understand what that
yeah,
terminology is.
well, I think code switching for sure, we can think about it in the context, in a lot of different contexts. For me, what I felt particularly when I was at the previous organization at the trauma center was like really this sense of, when we're client facing, we're showing up with, again, power sharing, listening, empowerment, trying to create agency for our clients. But then, like, turning and going into a staff meeting where it felt like very hierarchical, and we all had to sort of defer to people in charge, defer to their expertise, lose our voices. And so to me, it sort of felt like I was like, patriarchy, something different, and then like back and forth throughout any given day, whether I'm client facing or speaking with a supervisor versus like speaking more with management and leadership. And I think we're so used to doing that, we don't even realize. I mean, that's, I think, the whole point of code switching is that we don't realize that we are doing it. And because it's so ingrained and it impacts us, right? To have to shift and always be toggling between those things. And it impacts our work. And so Dave and I really wanted to create an organization where people who work there can show up and be and feel tended to as human beings the same way we tend to our clients, the same way we tend to the people who come in and take our trainings or who practice yoga with us. Um, and that's
And
no small
and I
task.
want to say, because I really, of course, I resonate with what you're saying and wanting to create the same thing. I want to also say I have not done it perfectly. There have been times when we in our organization, we talk about zones, the zone of well-being, and that if we're in that zone of well-being, we're making the best decisions about not only ourselves, but our organization. And that we can get bumped into what we call the high zone or the low zone. And I sometimes even have a name for myself and I get bumped into the high zone. I said, instead of Elaine, that's Edwina. And sometimes you wouldn't even want to talk to her because she's not at her best self. And the same thing with being in the low zone where I'm disconnected from the people that I care about and even, the people within the organization, my family. And we talk about that as a paradigm of human nature. It's not that, oh, Elaine, you're bad when you're Edwina. I might have to apologize, but I also think there's something about creating what I think you and I both might refer to as a trauma-informed and resiliency-informed organization, that we make space and room, even with our own errors. And I'd say, oh my gosh, Jen, I am so sorry I did that. I was not my best self. I realized I was in my high zone. What can I do to repair this? Because sometimes the repair, it actually makes, not even sometimes, I think always almost, the repair makes the relationship stronger when you can come to that person and said, I wasn't my best self. Because I think
Absolutely.
that's part of it, right? It's not saying, and that's the difference between saying, it's sometimes people will call me an expert. They go, oh, you're an expert. I actually kind of, I don't like being called an expert. I say, well, I have an expertise. But sometimes when we think the expert, then that means you end there. But the expertise is, oh, I know something about that, but then so do you. And what if we can have a conversation about it? And so I think when we do that in an embodied way, because I know when I'm in my resilient zone, my zone of well-being, I can feel my breath very steady, my heart rate, my muscles are relaxed. I can say, okay, my prefrontal cortex, I think, is working better, so I can make better decisions, right? But if I'm in those higher low zones, I'm not good. But I understand that other people get into those zones as well. And when we talk the non-pejorative language, which I think is non-hierarchical and not patriarchal, that can shift the way an organization is run. I don't know what you think about what I just said.
Absolutely. I'm so right there with you. In particular, I think that, to me, my understanding of patriarchy is also like I have, the person in charge or people in charge, I have the answer and you have to listen to it, rather than acknowledging the reality of, you know, we're all figuring this out together. And if something doesn't work, maybe we can try something else. And so when we build in the humanity of and humility of human error and mistakes, that to me is doing something in just almost the polar opposite of a patriarchal equation, where it's sort of like, one of the things I've loved to be able to do is wrangle this with my co-founder Dave, and us to be able to have these conversations where he's sort of like, I feel this pull to have the answers, like that's my job actually. And I think that that's really true for a lot of people who are in leadership. A lot of male identifying people are sort of like socialized in that way of like, I should have the answer. I should know. And that's the way you lead, rather than leadership can look really different. I think what I've struggled with in that is, what does it look like to lead and say, here's what we're going to do. This may not work, or we may have to amend this, but this is what we're going to do. Not like I have the answers, follow me, but still follow where we're headed. I'm curious what your input is. Let's recap. Let's, circle back in a few months and see how it's going. Um,
And
and
I think we can say that, right? This is what we want to do. This is the way that we think we can do it. Does anybody have any comments about it right now? Because this is what we've kind of put together, a certain structure. Because when you're in leadership, sometimes you have to do that. But it
Mhm.
doesn't mean, but if you say, this is the way we're doing, or the highway, it's this is what we're doing. And what are your thoughts about it? Can we do it
Right.
better? Can we make it stronger? And I often say that about the community resiliency model, which, I started formulating 20 years ago. But, there's been so many people along the way that have said, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this? And I thought, oh my gosh, no, I didn't. Let's put that in. But if you're not open to the conversation, that this is the way we do it, or else, then you're not going to create, I think, something that is more accessible to people, that they feel they're a part of what's been created,
Exactly.
not up apart rather than apart, if that's right,
Yes.
what's been created.
And that would be my ultimate hope, is that anyone that would be working at the center feels a sense of ownership of the projects we're doing, the direction we're going, because their voice is included in it, because their ideas are embedded in it. And, typically for me, even in this last year, have stepped into executive director versus co-directorship, which is what our previous model was. It's interesting to kind of find the language around, okay, here's what I'm thinking. How does this land? What's your input? And we talk it through, and then we go in it, or maybe we do pivot. But it's very, very different. And
It's
I
different. And you know what I love? I
yeah.
love the or not. Well, this is what I've been thinking, that we could do this and this and this, or not. What do you think about this?
Mhm.
I often talk to the current executive director of the Trauma Resource Institute, and I'll talk to him like that, because I think there is something when you have founded something that people, I think I have influence, but I don't run the organization any longer, right? But I can still say, well, have you thought about this? And I do have this opinion. I don't know if it's right or wrong. And sometimes, not him, but others, he might, or someone else might say, well, no, I think we should do it this way. I go, oh, I didn't think about that. That is really a great idea. Because I know that when I started Try, um, with Jeannie Everett and with Lori Leach, um, none of us knew about running a nonprofit. I
Mm.
mean, we had great ideas of what we wanted to do to, change the world and healing, but that
Mhm.
didn't mean we knew how to run a nonprofit. And I'm so happy to say that, we're going to have our 20-year anniversary in October, and we're having our first international conference. And I'm going, wow, I can't believe it's been 20 years, but it's come with a lot of battle scars that, I say I cover up with my clothes, because I've had to keep going, even though and I'm going to call it patriarchal structures, have sometimes said to me, no, you can't do that, or you're not doing that good enough, or I know how to do it better. And honestly, I can say that it has not just men, it's also can be women that actually, I think, times swallow misogyny, not necessarily liking women, but that's not just a woman that does that, a man that does that. It can be a woman, right?
Of
So,
course.
and that's been kind of the learning about how sometimes some of the things that have come at me have been from people that I wouldn't have expected, that would come at me in this kind of hierarchical way. And I don't know, I'm saying that kind of self-revealing a lot about myself right now in terms of leadership, but I don't know if you have any comment about that.
Yeah, no, I think, it's sort of like that sense that I was brought to this conversation of this is a system that we've all been indoctrinated in, what regardless of our gender, regardless of our identities. And so we can internalize these structures of hierarchy, of power, um, in of coercion. You know, coercion is one that I think is such a fascinating one that shows up in all kinds of leadership. And you know, we've all been indoctrinated in that. And I think that, you know, even what you said about the expert piece, I resonate with that so much. And I think about how I also have a hard time with that language because I think when we call someone an expert or we call someone, I think, you know, we call them an expert, there's bypass that can happen so easily, right? It's like it becomes fixed and static as well.
Well, I think there's something else that can happen with it. And, people ask me about who are your heroes. There's actually an organization that like goes around saying, tell me about your heroes. And early when starting Try, in fact, I think it was in 2008, I met some very powerful people in the field of psychology.
Mm.
And it was not a good experience. It was actually, and these were like I would say at the time, these were my heroes. And it was one of the really a pretty traumatic experience to see that not only in terms of the way that I was treated, but the way that they treated others, that when you talk about the code switching, it was so incongruent to what I had idealized about these folks.
Yes.
And so, and then it changed me quite deeply. And after that, I say, I don't know if I have a hero anymore. I have people that I greatly respect, and I can greatly respect what they've written about, what they've contributed to the field of psychology and mental health, but I wouldn't necessarily call them my hero. I can say I respect their work, and that's different. And I actually very intentionally would craft my languaging differently because whenever you put someone, which I think is part of hierarchy, as a hero, you put them above everyone else, which is not a good thing to do to anyone, which I think because you only have one way to go when you're a hero, and that's down, right?
Exactly. We
So,
share this so much in our histories too, right? We have such an
yes.
interesting overlap of experience, and I had such a similar experience, you know, when I first started out of really feeling like I was getting to be able to be mentored by, you know, these really incredible, powerful leaders in the field of trauma in the body, and then this experience of seeing, you know, the harm that was perpetuated around me and to me, you know, was just devastating. And I'm just really proud of the work that Dave and I did to reorient ourselves and say like, okay, we're going to do something different. How do we do this differently? You know, I'm not going to undermine my colleagues. I'm not going to belittle them. I mean, some of those things seem obvious, and there are subtle ways that will permeate and show up in leadership, even if you're not bringing that spirit and you're doing your own inner work. And to me, that's also part of it. I've been so surprised at how many folks that I've come across in the field of psychology, of yoga, of helping and healing, who are not really tending to their own inner work. And there's no way we're not going to leak out on our colleagues and clients and whomever if we don't. But it still feels pretty
Yeah.
pervasive.
Well, and I think that, and I just want also to be really clear, that doesn't mean that I haven't leaked out sometimes, and I
Yep.
have.
Yep.
And
Me
then
too.
again, going back to, can I repair it? Is there anything that I can do differently to know that I don't want to have that happen again? And that's the self-reflection part. But I also want to say something about, you know, trauma-informed leadership. What does that mean? We talk all over the world about, oh, it has to be trauma-informed. Well, what does that mean to you, Jen, to be a
Yeah.
trauma-informed leader? And I imagine you've been curious about the answer to that for a long time.
Yes, absolutely, and continue to be because, like you say, this is a work in progress, and you know, as I make mistakes, and that's something that I really try to talk really openly about mistakes I've made and continue to make, in ways that can find myself being pulled into those patterns that the very systems that I'm trying to do something different from. And you know, to me, trauma-informed leadership is not having all the answers, is having as a leader, it's when you have more power, or the more power that you have, the more feedback you receive, which is what we see sort of the opposite of. Typically, when people are given or assigned more power, they receive less feedback and input from others. And that's what gets us siloed. That's what gets us put on a pedestal and isolated, actually. And so you continuing to practice the muscle of what's it like to hear from a colleague, a peer, someone you supervise that you've done something that felt like they were erased or they weren't listened to or felt like you didn't understand what they were trying to tell you and you misrepresented them. All of these things, those are muscles that you have to use in order to continue to be able to receive, internalize, and then actualize feedback. A lot of times feedback and
Yes.
input is performative, right? It's like, tell me your feedback, and then I'm just going to do the same that I've always done, And it's like,
Yeah,
what
it's almost
about,
like, oh, well, we need to ask that question, but really not going to change anything that we're doing. But
yeah.
also, getting feedback is not easy because the feedback can be painful, saying, well, you didn't listen to me, or you did this instead, or I thought we talked about this, but it didn't happen. But I think there can be, even with the best intention of wanting to have collaborative leadership and trauma-informed leadership, that there can be a fear with people that you work with about the people that are in leadership. And that's because also people that you're bumping against have also bumped against patriarchal systems, right? Whether there was our family or other organizations. And I had this, happen to me recently with someone within the organization that had a certain experience, and I couldn't figure out why they had this reaction to me. And then they explained to me that they'd had a previous boss that every time they did a certain thing, they would yell at them. So it was like their trauma history bumping into me asking for a request that was not good between us, that we ended up being able to talk about and heal. But it came with a lot of suffering for both of us before we got to that place. So I think but when we're a trauma-informed leader, we say, well, what happened? It's not like, oh, you're a bad employee, right? We will say, oh, well, what happened to them in order to respond to me that way? Or what happened to me in my history that makes me respond to them? And I can even think about early on thinking, oh my gosh, that person reminds me of my mom. She always was so directive, and that person is just like that. And I feel diminished. She didn't diminish me, I diminished myself. And that was a huge learning about this trauma-informed leadership, about what
Mhm.
happened, not only to them, but to me. And I see if you have anything you want to comment about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really potent. And to me, part of this is also, and this is something I do even as a therapist that I've really started putting into practice, is the more that we can also name our challenges and biases, not for someone to hold or be burdened by, but to be transparent around like, okay, this is an edge. And, or for me, for example, not that I'm naming this to my colleagues and coworkers, but um, I do get defensive pretty quickly because I'm pretty hard on myself. And so my inner work is to continue to soften to myself. But that's a work in progress. I've been hard and critical of myself my whole life. And so when someone gives me input that is hard to hear, or that I've hurt them, that I've done something that just hasn't had a good outcome, has had a negative outcome, I will start to do the thing I do, and then that makes me get really defensive. And so my work is to both say, like, I need to slow this down, or I'm feeling myself getting amped up, like, I want to hear you. Well, I'm going to pause, or let's come back to this. And then to be able to genuinely come back to it or tend to my own history around,
Yes,
you
and it's so interesting that you say that because I do that while I was saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting into my high zone. I can feel my ears getting hot." That's, because I'm an embodied person, right? To go, "Oh gosh, there's the warning sign." I said, "I just really need to pause. I might have to get off for a while. I'll come back, but I need to really chill and get back into that zone of well-being." But I think it's okay to pause.
yeah,
Not
pausing
only not
great.
only for me, but for them if they
Yes.
need the pause. Because if I'm getting into my high zone, it's not usually good for the person who I'm talking with. They can be getting into their low zone or high zone, or hopefully they can stay in their zone of well-being, but not necessarily because we're in a relationship.
Right. And then potentially they're trying to manage me as well as their own experience. We just had a really difficult conversation internally with one of the programs around kind of like where are they headed, what's next for them. And there were so many feelings that came up. And it was really helpful in that conversation to say, like, to name that there are feelings here and that like there's a lot of care. And it's also, we don't have to smooth over the intensity. Like there's intensity here. We may not be able to tend to it all today. We can come back to it if we want, but it also doesn't have to be like tied up in a bow. It's okay for it to for there to be a struggle, for us to kind of wrangle through difficult feelings or stuff coming up, and then try to figure out what the next step is together. And I think sometimes there can be an expectation of conformity, like we all have to be on the same page in order for us to move forward, as opposed to like, I had this experience, you had this experience. We may not always see eye to eye, or we won't get eye to eye, but like, what do we want to do next together? How do we want to move forward together?
But
And
even when you say that, how do we move forward together? It's not like, oh, well, you're wrong and I'm right. So just be quiet because we're going to do it this way.
right,
Because I think what the way that I just said it, I've heard people say that in patriarchal systems.
right,
And then it completely shuts everybody down. And then no one says anything because that leadership person has just said, I'm more important and my vista is more important than any of yours, which
exactly.
of course is what we don't want to do. And if we do it inadvertently, then that's when we go, okay, let's have a conversation. What do I need to hear? What do I need to do about my own work so that we don't repeat this? Because we will repeat it again and again if we don't. It's
Right,
like a different person, same issue, same experience inside the body. And it's like we're the hamster on the wheel and we don't know how to get off.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I think pulling back the curtain and being so transparency is another point that I think is huge for trauma-informed leadership or resilient leadership is the more transparent we can be about our thought process, what led us to it, our bias if we have them. I'm a yoga person. If I'm talking to the weightlifting program, I'm going to come from that vantage point. So I might need to be challenged a little bit or for them to say, "Hey, in the weightlifting world, it's different in this way." And it's like, right, right, right. That's right. I'm coming at it from yoga. Even though I'm an executive director,
Which
it's
is
my
very
bias.
different, right? So I've got to like, okay, this is a different perspective. I need to pause and listen. And we need to pause for our break right now. So we're going to take a short break, hear from our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute, which is a nonprofit that I founded, I'm so grateful that they sponsor this show. And we will be back in just a few minutes, and we will continue this, what I'm finding to be a very fruitful conversation with Jenn Turner. We will be back shortly.
The Trauma Resource Institute is a nonprofit organization cultivating trauma-informed and resiliency-focused individuals and communities worldwide. Our mission is to take people from despair to hope. We believe in a world where every child and adult has the capacity to recover from highly stressful and traumatic experiences. Check out iChill, our free app that helps you learn the wellness skills of the community and trauma resiliency models. Go to traumaresourceinstitute.com for more information.
Elaine Miller-Karras' book, Building Resiliency to Trauma, The Trauma and Community Resiliency Models, is available on Amazon.com. The book is about how to cultivate resiliency during and in the aftermath of traumatic experiences. The book also addresses body-based trauma interventions, combined with psychoeducation about the biology of trauma and resiliency. Elaine also offers personal consultations. For more information, you can contact her at elaine@resiliencywithin.com.
This is Resiliency Within with Elaine Miller-Karras. To reach the show, you may send an email to elaine@resiliencywithin.com. Now, back to this week's show.
Welcome back. I am with Jenn Turner, from the executive director and co-founder of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in Massachusetts. And we have been talking about transcending patriarchy. So we've been having a lively conversation, and there was a question that I actually had sent to Jenn that we really talked about in the break that we wanted to talk about. And this is the question. What happens to creativity, innovation, and trust when people feel psychologically safe? that really is our resiliency informed way that hopefully that we're working. So Jen, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at kind of how do we want um, people to be able to thrive when they're at work and creating and leading and whether, I think that we all can do kind of our best work when we're not worried or managing the person in charge, when we're not like, how do I need to shift or how do I need to say this in order for it to be heard or how do I need to try to contain this, feedback if it's difficult. When there's this safety and trust that my voice matters, that my perspective matters, then we're able to really, I think, be creative. We're able to really express ourselves. I think about when you're with like a loved one, right? And you speak what's on your mind, or you say what's coming up for you and what you're curious about and start to make connections. Ideally, we want people to be able to do that in the workplace as well, where they feel safe enough. And that also, if they say something goofy or they're like, that's not a great idea, no one is going to hold them to it or be
Yeah.
judging them about it. And to me, that's where some beautiful work can happen. And I see that starting to really take root in, hopefully my colleagues feel the same way in the organization that, I run because there's spaciousness for us to show up in our imperfection, have our needs, and then creativity flows and the possibilities become endless because then you're also allowed to make mistakes.
Yes.
Part of growth in the workplace and an organization is about being able to make mistakes and not being chastised or penalized for that.
Yeah, and I think that, when you say that too, is that, and again, we're walking back to, what happened to you. We may have grown up in a family where mistakes were not appreciated, that if you made even a minor mistake, that you were chastised. So when you're in an organization and you bring that history with you, and maybe you've said something and it could be that you just said, "Oh, I don't know about that." All of a sudden it could shut someone down, and you're not trying to shut someone down, you're just saying I don't know. So I think it's important that when we talk about the way that we're looking about innovation and having what I'm going to say is a matriarchal view is that when you're raising children do all sorts of different kinds of things, and you may have 6 kids and they're all a little bit different, and you're not going to respond to each one in the same way, and sometimes they do things that you're going, let me know about your thinking about that because I'm not certain. But you could say that to an employee, for example, and they could take it completely different. But if you
Yep.
have that matriarchal perspective, you can go, "Oh, I get it. I bumped into something. Well, can you tell me what I needed to know that I didn't understand?" And it can be as simple as saying something like that, that can sometimes change the course of a conversation.
Absolutely. And as you're talking too, I'm thinking this is also, we're talking about decolonizing. We are talking about, if we want to take it out of gender, we're talking about this
Yes.
radical unlearning, right? And, to me, what is also, when I think about something being trauma informed, is that if it gets too rigid, even in the now we're non-coercive or now empowerment or this or that, like what is psychologically safe is so individualized and getting curious with each person you work with too. How do you like to work? How do you like to receive feedback? Um, are you someone who needs
Yes.
direct input or you'd actually really need to be reminded of the things you're doing well because you tend to focus on the negative? Are you someone who wants to work and communicate on video call, or you do better over text, or email is best? Like being curious about all these things within, of course, the frame that we have available to us as an organization or as a leader, but not just assuming that people have to assimilate. Like, can we make space for you to show up as you are, introverted, or someone who has to like bounce ideas off of someone, or
Which
whatever it might
which is a
be?
big difference between people. And I mean, that was to me was one of the most important learnings. I'm an extrovert, and I know that I have to bounce ideas. And I speak to think. And I thought, oh, this is what how I and I might like say, oh, we could do this, and this. And someone who like has to really go internal to think before they speak would think that everything that I said was what I was intending to do, which would be impossible, right? And
Right.
that had caused a lot of friction. And so the learning of that, for example, the executive director of Try, he is an introvert. So I was just talking to him this morning and I said, well, I wanted to talk to you about this because I knew that you need to chew on it a little bit. Maybe we can talk about it later. And so I know him well enough to know that if I asked him, I'm thinking about this, tell me what you think right now, it would be like, oh, wait a second, because I'm asking him to do something that he knows is not his best self. Just as if he said, Elaine, I'm going to come back to you in 10 years about your idea. I'm going, wait a second, that's too long. I need to have the answer sooner. So we'll go back and forth now. Say, well, how much time do you need to think about this before you get back to me on this idea? But you see the difference in not judging, oh my goodness, here he's going, he's not going to get back to me. He's got to think about this for years. I don't say that. I say, well, how much time do you need? It's such a different way of looking at the way we communicate with one another.
Right. Well, and to me, what I hear in that is also the challenges around urgency. Like your urgency may not be my urgency, and like what's actually urgent versus what do I just, am I just feeling
Yes.
like I want to deal with, you know?
And I tend to go, it's now, but it may not be now. So it's giving space for the pause that you mentioned, previously.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it is, to me, leadership is such a cool opportunity to learn about other people and learn about yourself too. Um, if you allow it to be. It's such a interesting, there's so much opportunity for learning how different people like to function, how they like to use their time, how they, one of the things that we do pretty well, I think, as an organization is some people really like structure in terms of their hours. It's like, I'm going to be on the clock then and off the clock. Some of us are much more fluid. It's like, oh, I'm going to go bop out and go to the beach this afternoon. But then on Saturday, I'll spend 4 hours responding to emails and, working on slides or something. And the trust in that and also the spaciousness around how we work at our best and
Yeah.
what we, you know, and again, conforming. And if there's something someone can't conform with or to, that we might ask them to, well, what's the workaround?
Well, and I think what's important about that too, because we talk about in the trauma and resiliency informed perspective, caring of self. And just again, to be transparent, I haven't always been great at that because the organization and the needs of the organization would take precedence over,
Yep.
oh, do I go for a walk or take that Zoom call with an important, let's say, donor? And so I would go, oh, I'm going to have to take that call with the donor over the walk. That's changing as I've gotten older. I'll say, well, when could we schedule it at another time? Will that make a difference or not? If there's an or not, no, they only can meet with that. They're going to be gone out of the country for, 6 months. Of course, I'm going to not take my walk. But I think early on in my career as being a leader, and I can't say even early on, maybe last year, sometimes would not care for myself in the way that I needed to care for self. I don't know if that's happened to you or not.
Yes,
Jen,
exactly.
maybe I'm just alone on that one.
Yeah, it's the like a ongoing process and it ebbs and flows too, for sure. And
Yes.
to me, that's another example of someone's urge. It's like, okay, can we talk about actually like what are the ramifications if we wait a week or we schedule it for later? And you might, maybe the person who's got the call lined up for you is excited about it and wants you to do it now, but also is it actually urgent? And will you be better off if you take your walk, ground, and then, talk either later in the day or later in the week? And I think that's such a different orientation to than self-sacrifice, which
Yes.
is, I think a lot of times, people who hold identities that have historically done the emotional labor of tending to community, of tending to hurt and trauma, have learned that self-sacrifice is how you do it, is actually part of the work. And it really doesn't have to be, but that's also some radical unlearning that's ongoing, certainly for me, around prioritizing that. Even me as a parent, it's like, if I'm not today, for example, I have an appointment with my acupuncturist and, the kids have to fend for themselves and I had to change a meeting, but like, I know that will pay dividends in my ability to be creative, to be resourced, to show up and hear feedback or whatever it is that needs to happen from a place of not deprivation, a
Well, and
place.
And I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting when you say that because we're talking about a trauma-informed perspective. And one of the things that we talk about in the community resiliency model and the trauma resiliency model is we talk about the survival responses. And
Mhm.
so the four survival responses that we call them the four F's, right? Friends, fight, flight, and freeze. So what's friend? It's tending and befriending. Some people call it fawning, which I'm not keen on that word. But tending and befriending is something that primarily women, I mean, other people did it too, but primarily women would do to take care of the social group and children during times of great stress. It was their responsibility just because of the way that we're designed and that we give birth to the children and we feed them for the first couple years of their life when they're infants, etc. But if we take that and befriending into behaviors, sometimes it can cause us self-harm by not doing the things we need to care for self. Because, and I could say that for me, I've been a big tender and befriender. I've probably used every single one of the survival strategies, but I'd say that have you been too? Yes. But we also can go into flight where I'm going, I'm out of here. I am so done talking about this conversation, which I've done that before too. Now, fight is a little bit different where I can be very assertive at times when I really believe in something. But then do we freeze? And that means that we don't say something when we wish we could. And I think that in traditionally patriarchal systems, that many people, regardless of gender, would not say what they really think. And sometimes, even if they were asked, they may all of a sudden lose their ability to speak and
Yeah.
not be able to say the words. It really is part of a freeze response. And I'm just wondering what your comment is about, because we're really talking about, does trauma-informed leadership, is it an antidote to authoritarian leadership in the way that I just described that?
Well, to me, just like any new way of being, we can potentially replicate the patterns of the old way of being, right? And so
Yes.
there's a world, and when you're talking about sort of the fight response, I have a fiery side for sure in me that comes out as assertive, and
I
at
think I
times it,
definitely have a fiery side, Jen.
yeah, sometimes comes out as like, let's go, I'm ready to flip the table. I would sort
Yes.
of joke about that, and there's a way in which I could, and I feel this, and it's really great that I have colleagues I can voice this with, particularly my co-founder Dave, where I'm like, I just want to be like, this is the right way, and I know that I'm doing it the right, and it's like, and that is replicating the whole, I have all the answers, I know how this is done, this is, what I'm thinking is right, because I'm so passionate about my perspective and our perspective at the center around trauma, around depathologizing these responses to overwhelming events, or all of the things that we believe in the work that we do. And it is a slippery slope to replicating the very thing that I'm trying to undo when I'm like, but I'm right. And this is how it is. So it takes, to me, it's also that kind
Self-reflection.
of like, continuing to be encouraged to practice humility and have an outlet for those trauma responses to the part of me that wants to flip the table or burn it all down, to have an outlet for
Well,
that.
it's like the self-reflection going, oh, here it is again, right?
Yeah.
And now I could ground myself. I don't have to run away. And I can say, maybe I had to do that when I was a kid, but I don't need to do it now. This is
Right.
different. This is like talking about how we're going to plan the next conference. It's not maybe that kind of life or death experience that I may have had when I was a child, for example. I mean, those kinds of things come up. But when we appreciate that that is a paradigm that we're working under as well. And I think that leads me, there's another question that I think maybe is important for us to say a little bit about. We've already touched upon it, but how do we challenge abuse of power without recreating the same dynamic? You're just kind of referring to that, right? So
Yeah.
with this trauma resiliency informed approach, we both have seen people abuse power that have been very powerful, respected worldwide, and going, oh my gosh, this is not the person I thought it was, right? So how do we change that up? How do we not repeat it? And how do we speak up? If we
Right.
felt disempowered, how do we do that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, this is so much at the heart of what I think about almost daily, really, around anything from if I'm having a conversation with an outside partner potentially, and we have a differing approach to something like, how do I not replicate and turn into a bully or turn into someone who's pushing my ideals? and not hearing that they have a different approach to trauma or they have a different approach to the body. Or, it's funny. When I think about challenging abuse of power, it's like, what does truth telling look like? And is there room for multiple truths? Yes. And what happens when there's like a definitive abuse of power? I think sometimes that can get really sticky for me as well. Like, I worked at a Zen center last year that is now more public, but there's an abuse of power of the head priest and founder and sexual abuse that was happening.
Mhm.
And watching the ways that reality became so fluid and sticky.
Mhm.
And so also knowing when we're causing more harm to try to get someone to a belief or to see things from a perspective that they may not. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what happened in a way when we formed the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, is that we had colleagues that were at the trauma center that were really in a place of almost having like a blindfold on to be able to see the trauma dynamics that were embedded in the culture. And so it's like, do I fight you to try to get you to see my perspective, or do I actually have to step back and pivot and do something different? To me, sometimes the justice side of challenging abuse of power gets really confusing, actually. It's like, is it important to just keep naming this, or am I causing more harm to say, like, but this is trauma and we're replicating this pattern? And if we don't speak the truth of what's happened in this organization, or we don't highlight that this person has abused power, we are participating in trauma.
And
Yes.
you're participating in trauma and you're being complicit by not
Yes.
speaking, or I mean, and then it's very difficult because maybe the only choice is to leave a job where you're the sole support of your family. And when we talk about the cycle of abuse, when we talk about intimate partner violence, well, but there can be violence in the workplace as well. That is the same dynamic. Because if I speak up, I could lose my job. That's hurting my family and me. And so is it better to be silent and to try to do everything in the way they say I should do it? But it's never really quite enough because there will be another meeting and another abuse of power again. So
Yes.
then again, you can't get off that, the hamster wheel because you're so stuck on it. And then you have very, powerful people too saying, you're wrong. No, I'm not that way. And then you start doubting how you look at reality. And I think that happens in a system that has that hierarchical perspective that you do not ever question that
Yes.
leader.
Yes. And so for me, so much of this, and my mind's even kind of wandering to clients that I've worked with who have decided not to prosecute or bring things to the courts because it's sort of like nothing, the sense of like all of these dead ends or blockades to that. And like, is that challenging it, or is challenging abuse of power or when something has happened about changing how we live in the world, is claiming our agency of creating something different, of choosing not to actually engage in that system and structure. To me, that's exactly what we did with the centers. Dave and I were very deliberate, like, should we stay here and try to wrangle with this? And it was like blockade, blockade, you know, and it would have been a lot of fighting and probably us replicating trauma patterns
Yeah.
rather than actually this isn't the place for this. For us, the biggest way to challenge this is to build something new. And we had the ability to. We had the support from the parent organization, which was really so beautiful. And um, people don't always
It's
have
kind
that
of like the
option.
phoenix. I'm just, think the phoenix. I mean, rising from,
Yes,
the ashes. I mean, because if you would have stayed, in that abusive, what would have happened? You wouldn't be where you are right now. And you almost
exactly.
had to live through that to create this. And I guess that's the other thing I want to say about it is I didn't not know that I had the power, and I'm not using power in a negative, but in a positive, to create something that was different because I didn't believe in myself enough to think I could
Right.
until sometimes the abuse became so big that I said, no, I can't continue. I have to draw a line in the sand. It sounds like that's what you did. You
Exactly.
drew a line in the sand.
Big line in the sand. And with there was still with care of like, appreciating all that we had learned from the colleagues that were left standing in the ashes, but saying also like respectfully, we're going to go do this different thing. And having that process of um, how do we want to do it differently? And I almost feel like this is the first year, we're 8 years, 9 years into the organization. This is the first time where it feels like
Mm.
I'm not thinking about how do I not do that? How do I not replicate that? And more, I'm like, okay, here we are. Now, how
This
do we
is what
keep
we've
growing?
done. Yes.
How do we keep growing? How do we keep the channels of communication open? How do I keep learning? But not so much out of fear of, I don't want to replicate trauma dynamics in the workplace. I don't want to replicate it in this organization. And as we are creating these models, like that feels a little less fear-based and more curiosity based, which to me is also part of healing. When we can move from a place of fear and kind of responding in what, even if it's I don't want to do that or I want to do things differently, it's still in response to the trauma or the impact rather than
And Jen, I
what.
think you're just like wonderfully feeding into this one question that I had is what does resilient leadership look like in an organization, in families and communities? But you just described it
Right.
because you've moved out of like, oh, we are resilient and we've created something. Yes, we came out of like using the phoenix as our metaphor, right?
Right.
But look what is happening now and all that you've accomplished in the last 9 years and the growth that's happened in your organization and how well respected you are, literally in not just the United States, but in many parts of the world.
It is part of me, it's like I hear you say that and I feel it and I'm like, and how do we not get complacent? Like how do we just continue to grow? How do we continue to, because of, and yes, you're right. We have built this thing that I am really
Well,
proud
I
of.
hope that you can pause for a second and really sense that, of
Thank
course,
you.
we're talking about the embodiment of that, right?
I know. Yeah, it's great. You're right. You're right. I can take it.
If you could, those of you that are listening on Voice America, she has a beautiful smile, and she just has a great smile on her face right now. This is also on YouTube as well. But I mean, I think there's something about the knowing of that, and just even seeing the energy in your body. This and really the smile is all over. That the embodiment of that's happened. But sometimes we also have to pause to remember that,
Yeah.
because when we're also trying to create and we're listening to people and expanding this kind of trauma resiliency informed approach. It's a thing, isn't it?
It is a
It's a
thing.
thing. It's a
It is a
thing.
thing.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a better word to say about it, but it's like what I always say about what else is true. Because yes, there's been suffering through it, but there's also been incredible richnesses that have come from the journey into the place where you are right now.
Right.
And I cannot believe we're almost at our end again. Every time I talk to you, it feels like a minute. So I really want you to and invite you to share your reflections as we're ending about what's important that you've learned coming out of a patriarchal system, really bringing in this approach as the antidote and
Mm.
what's happening today.
I mean, what I'm sort of feeling in this moment as we've been talking through this is also that, the very people that were leading the organization where there was so much harm that happened also are suffering. It's like
Yes.
this idea of how do we not replicate these same dynamics when we're trying to build something new? Part of it, I think, is not villainizing someone who has has caused harm. It's like we can name it, we can say we don't agree with it, we don't want to participate in it, and those are people that are suffering. It's not necessarily my responsibility to tend to that. That's something people have to do in their own journey, but it's also not this sort of like, and now I'm going to do something better. Or now it's like, this is about being human, actually. This is about the human struggle and how power changes us, how we want to be careful and hold it so lightly and so tenderly because it can really change us, how we share it, and how we continue to tend to our own wounding and hurt that,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm going to be carrying around forever. It might change my relationship with it, but I still will have those,
Yeah, but it's
those
it's still
wounds.
there. It's like, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have to lead. Doesn't have to be on our lap. It can be, oh yeah, that's back here. And of course it really did change me. But this
Yeah.
is what's true now. And I guess I also want to say that I think sometimes it is hard to be compassionate towards people that have harmed us.
Yes.
And I know that there are things happening in the world right now that it's some things that are unimaginable that are affecting populations in different parts of the world. And where can we find compassion? And I don't have the answer to that. That, are there things that, for example, are unforgivable? Maybe there are. And
Yep.
I've heard people say that. But yet, can you also think what led to that person committing that act or that nation committing that act? If we don't ask those curiosity questions, maybe we'll never come to how do we end war? How do we end genocides? How do we end the great sufferings that happen? But I think coming from this stance of curiosity is really important for us to do as human beings all over the planet, because I look at us as one common humanity that are often not kind to
Yes.
each other.
It's
And
like I had a client just the other day ask me, like was speaking about her own perpetrator. And it's like
yeah,
that person does, it's sort of like, how do we stop this cycle? And it's like that person deserves healing. It's not your responsibility, not on your back. It may not be even something that I could do and is offer here, but that person still is entitled to healing if they should seek it, right?
yeah,
And that to me is a different perspective than, this is evil, this person's bad. It's like trauma begets trauma. People who have
yes.
been traumatized traumatize other people.
Well, I often say
So
undigested trauma,
there we go. Yep.
right, is going to just continue to traumatize not only their families, their communities, and their nations. I mean, that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah.
So, Jenn, I just want to thank you again for coming on. I feel like this is not going to be our last conversation on Voice America.
I hope not.
I think we're going to have to come back periodically and just do a check-in with each other to see what's happening in the world.
I love
But I
it.
want to greatly appreciate the work that you're doing and that I know that you're continuing to do, and just the courage it took to, really to speak truth to power. That is also part of what we're talking about, because it takes courage, and I don't think it's ever easy, but that
Indeed.
it's important to do that even when we don't know what the consequences might be. So, with a great bow to you, and to say to my listeners, my international listeners, thank you for coming to listen to Voice America and to Resiliency Within. And please take a moment to remember what else is true about your life. And if you are in a situation that feels, oh, I don't know if I can go forward, you may want to think about, are there some curiosity questions you need to ask yourself, some supports that may be within your friendship network that may change the course of your life? Because I think probably that's happened to Jenn and I more than once. So until we meet again, this is Elaine Miller-Karras signing off for Resiliency Within.
Thank you so much for joining us this week for Resiliency Within. Please tune in again next time for another edition featuring your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. We'll talk again soon.